The bell above the door chimed, and Lily's head snapped up. Her heart did a frantic little dance against her ribs before settling into a dull, familiar ache. It was just a couple seeking shelter from the late-night Miami humidity, not the shadows she feared. She forced a tight smile, grabbing 2 menus. Her diner apron, stained with a faint trace of ketchup, felt like armor. It was the uniform for the life she was trying so desperately to build, one clean plate at a time. She moved through the worn linoleum landscape of Wynwood Eats with a practiced, quiet grace. Her eyes, however, never stopped moving, constantly scanning the door, the street outside, the faces of her customers. She was a hunted animal trying to pretend it was just another night at the watering hole. As she wiped down a recently vacated table, her sleeve slid up, revealing the ghost of a bruise on her wrist, a faded purple map of a life she'd run from. She quickly pulled the sleeve back down. No one needed to see that. "Hey, dollface. This coffee is cold," a man with a gravelly voice called out from a booth near the kitchen. Lily didn't flinch. She just picked up the coffee pot. "Right away, sir." Her voice was soft but steady. She had learned long ago that reacting was a mistake. Resilience was her only weapon. She refilled his cup, her movements smooth and efficient, ignoring the way his eyes lingered on her. It was then that she felt another gaze, heavier and more intense than the rest. It came from the corner booth, the one half cloaked in shadow. A man sat there alone. He'd been there for an hour, nursing a single cup of black coffee. He wore a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to absorb the diner's cheap lighting. In a place of cracked vinyl and greasy spoons, he was a slash of black ink on a crumpled page. She had tried to ignore him, but it was impossible. He wasn't looking at the menu or his phone. He was watching her. Every move she made, from wiping a counter to taking an order, he observed with an unnerving, analytical stillness. It wasn't the leering stare of the man with the coffee. This was different. Colder. It felt like being studied by a predator trying to decide if she was worth the chase. Her pulse quickened. Men like him didn't come to places like this unless they wanted something. She kept her back to him as much as she could, focusing on the rhythmic clatter of dishes in the kitchen. But the feeling of his eyes on her was a physical weight. The neon sign outside the window flickered, casting the diner in a wash of unsettling red light, then plunging it back into its normal, tired yellow glow. Flicker. Red. Yellow. With each pulse of light, the shadows in the man's corner seemed to deepen. He hadn't moved a muscle. He just sat there, a dark king on a vinyl throne, watching her. Lily felt a new kind of fear begin to curdle in her stomach, one that had nothing to do with the men she was running from and everything to do with the one who had just found her. The last customer finally left, and the diner fell into a tired silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Rain began to slash against the windows, smearing the neon glow across the glass. Lily untied her apron, her shoulders aching from the long shift. All that was left was the trash. One last task, and she could go home to her small, empty apartment and lock the door behind her. She pushed open the heavy back door, dragging the overstuffed plastic bag with her. The alley was a canyon of wet brick and overflowing dumpsters, smelling of rain and old grease. The flickering red light from the Wynwood Eats sign painted the slick pavement in a hellish, pulsing glow. A sudden shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down her spine. It wasn't from the rain. 2 figures detached themselves from the deeper shadows by the dumpster. Lily's breath hitched in her throat. She knew them. Her carefully constructed world didn't just crack, it exploded into a million pieces. "Well, look what we have here," the taller one sneered, his voice a familiar gravelly poison. "Little bird, all grown up." "Leave me alone," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. She took a step back, but her heel hit the brick wall behind her. Trapped. The second man, shorter but built like a bulldog, took a step forward. "He's not happy, Lily. You took something that wasn't yours. He wants his property back." Panic clawed at her throat, cold and suffocating. "I don't have anything." "You have yourself," the tall one said, reaching for her. His fingers wrapped around her arm like a vice. Lily cried out, a small, desperate sound, and struggled against his grip. He yanked her forward, and the rough fabric of her apron tore with a sickening rip. The sound was as loud as a gunshot in the narrow alley. Suddenly, a new shadow fell over them. A figure stood at the mouth of the alley, a silhouette against the distant streetlights. The man from the corner booth. He moved with an unnerving calm, the rain seeming to slide off his expensive suit without daring to touch him. He didn't run or shout. He just walked toward them, his steps measured and silent on the wet asphalt. The man holding her laughed. "Get lost, suit. This is private business." The suited man didn't answer with words. He closed the distance in a blur of motion. There was a sharp, sickening crack as he twisted the man's wrist. The grip on Lily's arm vanished as the thug screamed and stumbled back. The bulldog lunged, but he was met with a brutal, precise strike to the throat that sent him choking and gasping to his knees. It was over in less than 5 seconds. Not a fight. An erasure. The two men were groaning messes on the ground. The man in the suit stood over them, his expression one of pure, cold disgust. He hadn't even broken a sweat. Then, he turned his gaze to Lily. She was pressed against the wall, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Her hand clutched the torn fabric of her apron, the only shield she had left. His eyes, dark and unreadable, took in her terror, the torn cloth, the defeated men on the pavement. He looked at her as if she were a complex problem he was deciding how to solve. His voice was low, a dark rumble that cut straight through the noise of the storm. "They will not stop." It wasn't a guess, it was a fact. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "I can make them." Lily could only stare, her heart hammering against her ribs. He extended a hand, not to help her up, but as if presenting an unavoidable truth. "Come with me." The car moved through the rain-slicked streets like a silent black shark. Lily sat rigid in the leather passenger seat, the smell of rain and expensive upholstery filling her lungs. She hadn't said a word since the alley. She couldn't. The man beside her drove with an effortless, focused calm, his hands steady on the wheel as the city lights smeared into streaks of color outside her window. Her old life, the diner, her apartment, her fragile independence, was receding behind them with every powerful, quiet turn of the engine. They left the city glow behind, turning onto a private road that snaked along the coast. The storm was angrier here, waves crashing against the sea wall just beyond a line of impossibly large houses. His house, when they arrived, wasn't a house. It was a fortress of glass and white stone, a stark, modern palace that seemed to challenge the raging ocean. He led her inside. The heavy front door closed behind them with a soft, final click, shutting out the storm. The sound echoed in the vast marble foyer. It was beautiful and terrifyingly empty. Cold. A man in a dark suit stood silently by a staircase, his eyes forward, his presence a silent declaration that this was not a normal home. This was a territory, and its owner had just brought something new inside. Sebastian, he had told her his name in the car, a single word dropped into the silence, led her up the sweeping staircase. Their footsteps were the only sound on the polished stone. He stopped before a heavy wooden door and pushed it open, gesturing for her to enter. The room was bigger than her entire apartment. A massive bed with crisp white linen sat in the center, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a private balcony overlooking the churning, black sea. It was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. A gilded cage. She walked instinctively toward the balcony door, a desperate need for fresh air hitting her. She slid it open, but it stopped after only a few inches, held by a lock she couldn't see. Just enough to feel the salt spray on her face, but not enough to get out. A cold dread trickled down her spine. When she turned back, Sebastian was watching her, his expression unreadable. "You will be safe here," he stated, his voice as calm and unyielding as the stone walls around them. "No one will find you. No one will touch you." He walked to a large closet and opened it. It was filled with clothes in her size, dresses, jeans, sweaters. A life's wardrobe for a stranger. He then picked up a sleek new phone from a dresser. Your old phone is a liability. This is yours now. Finally, he held up a small velvet box. He opened it. Nestled inside was a simple, delicate silver bracelet, its chain catching the low light. The men who hurt you, he said, his voice dropping, taking on a hard, dangerous edge. I despise predators. Men who prey on those who cannot fight back. That will not happen to you again. He stepped toward her, and she flinched. He paused, then gently took her wrist. His fingers were warm against her cold skin as he fastened the bracelet. It felt heavy. Too heavy. A beautiful manacle. You will live under my roof. You will follow my rules, he continued, his gaze intense. In return, you have my protection. That is the arrangement. He let go of her wrist and stepped back, leaving her standing in the middle of the vast, silent room. He had just laid out the terms of her new existence. He hadn't asked? He had informed her. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Lily was alone. She looked down at the silver chain gleaming on her wrist, then back at the sliver of open air on the balcony, the raging storm outside a perfect mirror for the one breaking inside her. She was safe. And she was a prisoner. For a long time after he left, Lily didn't move. The silence in the room was a living thing, pressing in on her, broken only by the distant rage of the ocean. Her fear from the alley was fading, replaced by a slow, simmering anger that burned away the cold shock. She looked down at the silver bracelet on her wrist. It was delicate, beautiful, and felt as heavy as a shackle. A brand. This man, Sebastian, had saved her life, but he was trying to steal it at the same time. Gratitude was a bitter pill she couldn't swallow. Her resilience, the quiet strength that had gotten her through so much, screamed that this was wrong. She would not be traded from one prison to another, no matter how pretty the walls were. Her feet moved before she decided to let them, carrying her out of the room and down the silent, cavernous hall. She found him in a study lined with dark wood and books he had probably never read. He was standing in front of a window that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, a dark silhouette against the violent flashes of lightning outside. I need to ask you something, she said. Her voice was small but clear in the large room. He didn't turn around. You need to rest. No. The word was sharp, surprising even herself. I need to know why I'm here. He turned then, slowly, his eyes pinning her from across the room. They were dark, intense, and held no warmth at all. You are here because if you were not, you would be in the trunk of a car by now. Or worse. She took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She gestured wildly at the opulent room, the priceless art on the walls, the view of the raging sea. This isn't protection, she said, her voice gaining a tremor of outrage. This is a cage. A flicker of something, surprise? Interest, crossed his features before vanishing. He moved toward her, closing the distance until only a few feet of plush carpet separated them. The air grew thick, charged with the storm both outside and in. A cage is better than a grave, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Would you have preferred I left you in the alley? I would have preferred a choice. She shot back, her fear finally giving way to the fight he had seen in her. You didn't save me, you just claimed me. Why? What do you get out of this? He watched her for a long, unnerving moment, his gaze so intense it felt like he was seeing straight through her skin and into the frantic beating of her heart. The silence stretched, filled only by their breathing and the sound of the rain lashing against the glass. I protect what is mine, he said finally. The words were simple, possessive, and absolutely terrifying. Lily's breath caught in her throat. Mine! He said it as if he were talking about one of his cars or this cold, empty house. It should have sent her running, but she was trapped, and beneath the terror, a confusing, treacherous feeling began to stir. For her entire life, no one had ever fought for her, ever claimed her as something worth protecting. I'm not yours, she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It wasn't a kind expression. It was the look of a predator that knew it had already won. You are in my house, wearing my bracelet, and breathing because I willed it. For now, that makes you mine. He saw the war in her eyes, the fear fighting the defiance. He seemed to feed on it. He saw the woman who had calmly handled the belligerent customer, the woman who had refused to break in the alley, and he looked at her not as a victim, but as a challenge. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the study, leaving her alone with the storm and his suffocating words echoing in the silence. Lily sank into a leather chair, her body trembling. She touched the cool silver on her wrist. It was a chain, yes, but it was also a promise. She was terrified of him, but a deeper, more dangerous part of her was drawn to the absolute power in that promise. The days that followed blurred into a strange, suffocating routine. Lily explored the mansion, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty spaces. It was a museum of a life, filled with beautiful, cold objects that no one seemed to touch. She trailed her fingers over polished wood and cool marble, feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's world. Guards were always present, silent statues in dark suits, their eyes following her every move. They were the living walls of her new prison. She tested the boundaries constantly, a quiet rebellion simmering under her skin. One afternoon, she found a landline phone in the study where she'd first confronted him. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she picked up the receiver, the dial tone a sound from a forgotten life. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number for the diner, just wanting to hear her old boss's gruff voice, to know he was okay. Before the first ring could even finish, a smooth, female voice cut through the line. All calls are routed through Mr. Turner's security office. May I help you? Lily slammed the phone down, her breath catching in her throat. Her blood ran cold. She was completely, utterly cut off. Later, she tried to speak to one of the guards standing watch at the end of her hallway. What's your name? She asked, her voice steady. He didn't even blink, his gaze fixed on the wall opposite him. She was not a person to him. She was an asset to be guarded, a package to be watched. She was an object. Her refusal to be a passive doll in his perfect dollhouse only made the silence around her feel louder. Sleep offered no escape. The luxurious bed felt like a tomb, the silk sheets cold against her skin. One night, long after the house had settled into a deep stillness, she gave up. The walls of her room felt like they were closing in. She slipped out, padding barefoot through the darkened corridors, the moonlight painting silver stripes on the floor. She found herself in the library. It was the only room that felt remotely warm, the scent of old paper and leather a small comfort. She ran her hand over the spines of the books, not reading the titles, just needing to touch something real. You should be in bed. His voice came from the shadows, and she jumped, spinning around with a gasp. Sebastian stood by the enormous fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. She hadn't even heard him. I couldn't sleep, she said, her voice a little shaky. He took a slow step out of the darkness. This house has the best security money can buy. You are perfectly safe. It's not about safety, she shot back, a spark of her earlier defiance returning. I can't sleep because I feel like I'm suffocating. He watched her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He didn't get angry. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her as if she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. What did you want? He asked, his voice unexpectedly quiet. Before this? Before the men in the alley. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. Her anger deflated, leaving a hollow ache in its place. She looked away from his intense gaze, toward the rows and rows of books. I wanted my own place, she admitted, the words barely a whisper. A little diner. Nothing fancy. Just a few booths and a counter. A place where people felt safe. A place that was mine. She confessed her small, simple dream into the vast, expensive silence of his library. When she dared to look back at him, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It was something harder, something that looked almost like understanding. He saw the woman she was trying to be, the one the world had almost broken. He took a slow drink from his glass, the silence stretching between them. His resolve seemed to harden, his grip on the situation tightening. I will keep you safe, he said, his voice a low vow. So that one day you might have it. He turned and left her standing there alone. The glimmer of humanity she had just seen was terrifying. It wasn't a promise of freedom. It was a justification for her captivity, a reason for him to hold her even tighter. He now had her dream in his hands, another beautiful thing to lock away. The fragile piece of the mansion began to fray at the edges. Lily felt it before she saw it. The guards, once stoic statues, now stood with a new, rigid alertness. Their eyes weren't just watching her anymore. They were scanning the manicured lawns, the sea, the sky. Sebastian, who had been a constant, brooding presence, became a ghost. She heard his voice from behind closed doors, low and sharp, speaking in clipped tones on the phone. The air in the house grew thin, charged with a tension she recognized from her old life. The low hum of impending violence. Her old fear, the one she thought had been locked outside the mansion's heavy gates, began to seep back in. It was a cold dread that settled in her stomach, making the gourmet food the private chef prepared taste like ash. She was safe, he had promised. But the promise felt hollow now, a child's wish against a gathering storm. He found her one evening on the balcony, staring out at the calm, dark ocean. The storm in her memory was more real than the gentle waves below. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, his presence a wall of heat and power against the cool night air. They're looking for you, he said finally. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had yelled. Lily's blood went cold. Who? She whispered, though she already knew. The men from the alley. They're not working alone. He turned to face her, his expression carved from stone. They're disciplined. Persistent. They have been asking questions, putting pressure on people who know better. She wrapped her arms around herself, a useless shield against his words. What do they want? Instead of answering, he held up his phone. The screen glowed in the darkness. On it was a picture of her beat-up sedan, still parked on a side street a block from the diner. It looked pathetic and abandoned. Tucked under the driver's side wiper blade was a single, perfect white rose. Its petals were already starting to brown at the edges. Lily gasped, stumbling back a step. It was a message. His message. The man she had run from, the one whose name she couldn't even bear to think. He used to leave them for her after he'd been particularly cruel, a sick apology that was really a claim of ownership. A symbol that she was still his. The past wasn't a ghost anymore. It was here. It had found her. They know I was at the diner. She breathed, panic clawing at her throat. They know. They know more than that, Sebastian said, his voice dangerously low as he pocketed the phone. His eyes bored into hers. Leaving that flower on that car is not just a message for you. It's a message for me. It says they know who has you. And it says they are not afraid. His fury was a palpable thing, a cold fire that radiated from him. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was a challenge to his authority, an invasion of his territory. Someone had dared to touch something that belonged to him. He reached out, and his fingers brushed the silver bracelet on her wrist. His touch was not gentle. It was a brand, a reminder of their arrangement. You are not leaving this house, he commanded, his voice a steel trap. You will not go near a window. You will do exactly as I say. Do you understand? Lily could only nod, her throat too tight for words. The safety he had offered had vanished. Now, his protection felt like the eye of a hurricane. The gilded cage had become a bunker, and the storm was no longer just a memory. It was circling the walls, and she was the one who had led it right to his door. The image of the white rose burned behind Lily's eyes. It was a brand, a symbol of the man she had run from, and seeing it again felt like his hands were already around her throat. But now, it wasn't just on her. The poison had spread. That rose, left on her car, was a threat delivered to Sebastian's doorstep. She had brought this plague into his world. She thought of her old boss at the diner, of the guards who stood silent watch in the halls. They were all in danger because of her. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than any chain. She couldn't stay. She wouldn't be the reason someone else got hurt. Her chance came 2 days later. A new guard was stationed at the back entrance, a younger man with eyes that hadn't yet hardened into stone. She'd watched the routines, the deliveries, the shift changes. She knew a landscaping truck arrived every Tuesday at 10 a.m. She'd put on a simple pair of jeans and a dark sweater from the wardrobe he'd given her, a bitter irony. Then she waited. When the truck rumbled up the long driveway, she made her move. She slipped into the kitchen and told the chef she felt faint and needed some air, a performance of trembling hands and a pale face that was only partly an act. The chef, a kind woman who mostly ignored her, just nodded. Lily walked toward the back patio, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The new guard saw her but only tensed slightly. He'd been told she wasn't to leave the grounds, but a walk on the patio was allowed. She leaned against the railing, pretending to breathe in the salty air, timing the roar of the lawn equipment. When the guard turned his head for a split second toward the noise, she vaulted over the low stone wall, landing hard in a bed of hibiscus flowers. Then she ran. She ran without looking back, tearing through the manicured gardens and slipping through a gap in the perimeter hedge. She didn't stop until the humid, grimy air of the city filled her lungs. Freedom felt like suffocating. The familiar terror of being alone and hunted washed over her, a cold, sickening wave. Every passing car was them. Every shadow held a monster. But as she hurried down the unfamiliar streets, another feeling surfaced, sharp and unexpected. A pang of loss. She missed the unnerving calm of Sebastian's presence. She missed the absolute, terrifying certainty that as long as he was there, nothing could touch her. Hours later, she was huddled on a hard plastic bench in the Miami bus station. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and desperation. She had no money, no phone, no plan. She was just another lost soul in a sea of them, trying to become invisible. She watched the departure board, the names of cities flashing like impossible dreams. Maybe she could get a ticket to anywhere, start over again. A foolish hope. They would always find her. A shadow fell over her. Lily looked up slowly, her blood turning to ice. Sebastian stood there. He wasn't out of breath. His suit was still perfect. He looked as if he had simply materialized from the dirty air. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting rage. His eyes were black holes, promising a wrath she couldn't begin to imagine. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" he asked, his voice a low, deadly whisper that cut through the station's noise. She scrambled to her feet. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect you." "You understand nothing," he interrupted, his voice like cracking ice. He closed the distance between them in a single stride, his hand clamping around her upper arm. His grip was steel. "You challenged my word. You made a fool of my protection." He started pulling her toward the exit, his strides long and unforgiving. She had to half run to keep up. People stared but no one dared to interfere. He was a predator, and she was his prey, and the entire world knew to get out of the way. He dragged her out into the blinding sunlight and toward the familiar black car idling at the curb. He shoved her into the passenger seat without a word and slammed the door. The pretense of civility, of choice, of anything other than ownership, was gone. He got in beside her, the silence in the car roaring in her ears. As the car sped away from the station, back toward the coast, he finally spoke, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. His voice was a snarl, a vow forged in rage. "You are mine to protect. You will never run from me again." The ride back to the mansion was a silent torture. Lily stared out the window, watching the city blur past, but she saw nothing. The only thing in her world was the man beside her, a radiating core of cold, silent fury. Every breath he took seemed to suck the air out of the car. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his knuckles were white. She had broken his one rule, and the punishment was this suffocating, terrifying silence. He didn't speak a word as he pulled the car into the underground garage. He didn't speak as he got out, rounded the hood, and pulled her door open. His hand clamped around her arm again, not painfully, but with an inescapable finality. He half dragged her through the pristine halls of his fortress, past the silent guards whose eyes flickered toward them before snapping back to attention. He didn't take her to her room. He took her to the study. He finally released her in the center of the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind them. The sound was like a cell door locking. He stalked to the window, his back to her, a dark silhouette against the afternoon sun. Why? The word was a piece of chipped ice. Lily trembled, wrapping her arms around herself. I told you. I was trying to protect you. The rose, it meant he was close. I couldn't let him hurt anyone else because of me. He spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Protect me? He took 2 long strides, invading her space until she was forced to stumble back against the edge of his massive desk. You ran into the open, with no money and no weapon, and you thought you were protecting me? His voice was still low, but it was laced with a venom that made her flinch. You think I can't handle them? You think my world is so fragile that a few street thugs can bring it down? He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You did not run to protect me. You ran because you don't trust me. That was it. The accusation, so raw and true, broke something inside her. A sob tore from her throat, a ragged, ugly sound. Trust you? She cried, the words tumbling out in a torrent of pain and fear. All I have ever known is men who promise protection and deliver pain. He left that rose, don't you understand? It's his brand. It means he owns me. It means he will never, ever stop. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. She couldn't stop them. I have been running for 2 years. I sleep with a gun under my pillow. Every time a door opens, I jump. I brought his poison here, to your home. I couldn't let you or your people get hurt because I'm a disease he won't let die. She finally collapsed, her legs giving out as she slid to the floor, her body shaking with the force of her confession. All the terror she had held inside for so long was pouring out of her in the suffocating silence of his study. For a long moment, Sebastian just stood there, watching her break. Lily could feel his eyes on her, and she waited for the final, cold dismissal. But it didn't come. Slowly, she looked up through her tear-blurred vision. The rage was gone from his face. The fury in his eyes had been replaced by something else, something dark and haunted. The cold mask had cracked. He knelt, not close enough to touch her, but enough to bring them eye to eye. My father was a weak man, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp, completely devoid of emotion. He was a bully who drank too much and used his fists to feel powerful. My mother, she learned to be quiet, to make herself small, to never, ever challenge him. The air left Lily's lungs. He spoke as if he were reciting a stock report, but his eyes told a different story. They were looking at her, but seeing a ghost from his past. One day, I came home and found him standing over her. She was on the floor. I was 16 years old. He paused, and a muscle in his jaw clenched. That was the last day he ever touched her. It was the day I learned that the only thing that stops a predator is a bigger one. He looked away from her then, his gaze lost in a memory she couldn't see. I hate them, he said, the words full of a chilling, absolute conviction. Men who find their strength in hurting women. I hate them more than anything else in this world. He had just handed her the secret to his soul, the reason for his rigid code. It was a scar, just as deep and ugly as her own. They were 2 broken people, forged in the same kind of fire. Slowly, he stood up, the distance returning between them. The moment of vulnerability was over. His control was absolute once more, but now she understood it. You will not run again, he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. You will stay here, where I can see you. Where I can protect you. This is my fight now. You will trust me to finish it. The confession in the study changed everything. Lily was still his prisoner, but the bars of the cage felt different now. She had seen the scar he carried, the one that mirrored her own, and it had forged a strange, dangerous connection between them. He was no longer just a monster, he was a man built from the wreckage of a past he was still fighting. And Lily decided she was done being wreckage. She would not be a princess in a tower, waiting for a dark night to solve her problems. She was the problem, and she would be part of the solution. She started watching. Listening. She became a ghost in his house, not out of fear, but out of purpose. She learned the rhythm of his days, the hushed, angry phone calls, the way he paced the length of his study like a caged tiger. She saw maps spread across his desk, marked with red circles over parts of the city she'd never seen. He was hunting, and he was failing. The men from her past were shadows he couldn't pin down, and the frustration was making him reckless. One evening, she passed his study and found the door cracked open just enough to hear his voice, a low, frustrated growl. They're ghosts. No one has seen them. They go to ground and then surface just long enough to leave another message. He paused, listening to the person on the other end of the line. No, nothing. The usual underworld haunts are clean. It's like they're not even part of the city's network. Lily froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob. His words triggered something, a fragment of a memory from a life she tried hard to forget. A conversation she'd overheard between her pursuers, their voices arrogant and careless. They had talked about a place to lie low, a place off the grid, where Turner's dogs would never look. They had mentioned a name. She pushed the door open and walked in. Sebastian's head snapped up from the phone, his eyes flashing with anger at the intrusion. He held up a hand, a clear signal for her to leave, but she ignored it. She walked straight to his desk and stood there, waiting. He finished the call with a clipped, "I'll call you back," and slammed the phone down. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. "You're looking in the wrong places," she said, her own voice steady, surprising herself with its strength. "They aren't in the city's network because they don't need to be. They have their own places." His eyes narrowed. "And how would you know that?" "I listen," she said simply. "I remember. They mentioned a place once. The old shipping yard. The one by the port that was shut down after the last hurricane." A flicker of recognition in his eyes told her he knew the one. "They called it their kennel dot." He stared at her, the anger on his face slowly being replaced by a sharp, analytical focus. He was processing the information, weighing it. She could see the war in him, the instinct to dismiss her, to send her back to her room and lock the door. She wouldn't let him. She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on his desk. It was a declaration. "I am not a piece of property you hide away," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I am the reason they are here. I know their voices. I know how they think. Use me." The air in the room crackled with tension. He stood up, towering over her, a formidable wall of power and control. But for the first time, she didn't shrink away. She met his gaze, her chin held high. "This is not a game," he warned, his voice a dark rumble. "This is my life." She shot back. "Stop treating me like a liability and start treating me like a weapon." For a long, silent moment, he just looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the unbreakable spirit he had recognized from the very first night in the diner. He saw a survivor who was refusing to hide any longer. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Show me on the map." The power in the room shifted. It wasn't about captor and captive anymore. He unrolled a large map of the city's coastline, and she leaned over it, her finger tracing the derelict industrial parks until she found it. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. A fragile, dangerous alliance was forged in the lamplight of his study, built on shared scars and a mutual enemy. They were a team now, and Lily knew, with a terrifying certainty, that there was no going back. The late nights in the study became their new normal. A fragile truce had settled between them, built on shared purpose and sleepless hours. They worked side by side at his massive desk, the air thick with the scent of old paper and fresh coffee. Maps were spread out, marked with Lily's insights and his intelligence. For the first time in years, Lily felt a flicker of something she thought was long dead: hope. He treated her not as a fragile doll, but as an asset. He listened to her, his dark eyes focused and intense as she spoke. In these quiet hours, surrounded by the shadows of his dangerous world, she had started to trust him. "I need you to look through these," he said one night, pushing a heavy box of old personnel files across the desk. "These are from 3 years ago. Security Division. See if any names or faces match the contacts you remember." It was a test. A sign of his growing faith in her. Her heart gave a small, traitorous flutter. She nodded, pulling the box toward her and opening the first thick folder. The work was tedious. She scanned photos, names, and service records, her eyes growing heavy under the lamplight. Most were just faces, men who looked hard and unforgiving, but none she recognized. She was halfway through the box when she saw it. A face. Gaunt, with a cruel sneer she remembered from the rain-soaked alley. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand trembled as she pulled the file out. The name listed was Marcus Thorne. She kept reading, her blood turning to ice. She flipped the page and saw a second photo, attached to the same file as a known associate. The bulldog. The one who had told her that her old life wanted its property back. They were here. In a file on Sebastian's desk. Her fingers felt numb as she scanned the final page, a termination notice. Reason for dismissal. Excessive brutality. Violation of operational code. The words blurred. Excessive brutality. Violation of code. It didn't matter. The only words that mattered were the ones at the top of the page. Employer, Sebastian Turner. The realization hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. The study, which had started to feel like a sanctuary, suddenly felt like the coldest part of her cage. He hadn't just stumbled into her life. He hadn't saved a random waitress from monsters in an alley. His world had created them. These men, the source of her terror, had once collected a paycheck from the man who now promised her safety. The trust she had so carefully, so tentatively, started to build crumbled into dust. The shared glances, the quiet understanding, the fragile alliance, it was all a lie. His protection wasn't a choice, it was a penance. He was cleaning up his own mess, and she was the collateral damage. She didn't move. She just sat there, clutching the file, the betrayal a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. When Sebastian walked back into the room holding 2 fresh cups of coffee, she didn't look up. "Anything?" he asked, his voice calm. She finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. She pushed the open file across the polished wood of the desk. It slid to a stop directly in front of him. "Who are they, Sebastian?" she asked, her voice a dead, hollow whisper. He looked down. She watched his face, saw the flicker of recognition, the instant tightening of his jaw. The mask of control slipped, just for a second, and she saw the man beneath it cornered and exposed. He had nowhere to hide. He looked back at her, his dark eyes filled with a shame so profound it was almost uglier than his anger. He couldn't deny it. He didn't even try. "They were enforcers," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I cast them out. Their methods were savage. Even for me." Lily felt a bitter laugh bubble in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "So you threw them out into the world? You're monsters. And they found me." He had no answer. For the first time since she'd met him, Sebastian Turner was silent. He was the powerful man, the king in his fortress, but in that moment, she was the one with all the power. The trust they had built lay shattered between them, and Lily knew, with a devastating certainty, that she was more alone now than she had ever been in her life. The silence that followed his confession was a living thing, cold and sharp. Lily looked at the man before her, the man who had saved her, caged her, and now revealed himself as the architect of her nightmares. The betrayal should have shattered her. It should have sent her running back to the bus station, back to a life of looking over her shoulder. But she was tired of running. The anger inside her didn't burn hot, it froze into a solid, clear resolve. The world wasn't black and white. It was a murky, violent gray, and Sebastian Turner was its king. If he had created the monsters, then he was the only one who knew how to kill them. She stood up, her movements stiff. She didn't say a word. She just turned and walked out of the study, leaving him standing there amidst the ruins of their fragile trust. He didn't try to stop her. He probably thought she was going to her room to pack, to finally break and run for good. He was wrong. Lily walked into her bedroom, the gilded cage that now felt like an armory. She knelt beside the bed and reached underneath, her fingers finding the loose floorboard she'd discovered weeks ago. She pulled it up. Tucked inside, wrapped in an old, soft t-shirt, was a small, black pistol. It was heavy and cold in her hand, a relic from her past life, a final, desperate line of defense she had prayed she would never have to use. She had carried its weight for 2 years. Now, it was time for him to share the burden. She walked back to the study, her steps sure and silent on the marble floors. Sebastian hadn't moved. He stood exactly where she'd left him, a statue of shame and power. He looked up as she entered, his eyes dark with a pain she now understood. Without a word, she walked to the desk and placed the pistol on the polished wood between them. It looked small and deadly against the expensive grain. His gaze dropped to the weapon, and a flicker of shock of disbelief crossed his face. He looked back at her, seeing her for the first time not as a victim to be protected, but as a survivor with her own secrets and her own steel. "Teach me," she said. Her voice was not a whisper. It was flat, hard, and left no room for argument. "I know how to point and shoot. I don't know how to hit what I'm aiming at. Teach me." He stared at her, the silence stretching until it was thin and sharp enough to cut. "I will never be helpless again," she continued, her voice gaining a low, fierce intensity. "Not because of them. And not because of you. You owe me this. You will arm me against the monsters you set loose." It was not a plea for help. It was a demand for a debt to be paid. A long, slow breath escaped him. The shame in his eyes was burned away by something new, something that looked like respect. He was arming the one person who had seen his greatest failure, the living proof of his sin. And she was putting her life, and her weapon, in the hands of the man indirectly responsible for all her pain. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Downstairs. Now." The shooting range was in the basement, a soundproofed concrete bunker that smelled of cold metal and gunpowder. It was his private chapel of violence. He handed her protective glasses and headphones, his fingers brushing hers. The brief touch was electric, a current of unspoken promises and shared danger passing between them. He stood behind her, his presence a wall of heat at her back. "Your stance is wrong," he said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. His hands settled on her shoulders, turning her slightly. He moved her arms, adjusting her grip on the pistol until it felt like an extension of her own will. His body was pressed against hers, his voice a steady guide against the frantic beating of her heart. "Breathe out," he commanded. "Squeeze. Don't pull." She did as he said. The gun kicked in her hands, the explosion a deafening roar even through the headphones. A hole appeared in the paper target's center. He didn't praise her. He just adjusted her grip again. The lesson continued, a tense and intimate ritual of gunpowder and control. They were no longer captor and captive. They were something far more dangerous. They were partners, bound together by his promise and her pistol. The study had become their war room. The scent of coffee and gunpowder hung in the air, a strange perfume for their new alliance. For 3 nights, they had barely slept, poring over maps and security reports, the rest of the mansion and its silent guards fading into a distant reality. The world had shrunk to the circle of lamplight on Sebastian's desk, to the two of them against the shadows. He no longer stood over her. He sat beside her, his presence a steady, solid wall she could lean against. The betrayal still stung, a raw wound in her chest, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, driving need to see this through to the end. They're smart, Sebastian said, his voice a low growl of frustration as he traced a line on a map of the city. They hit and fade. They know my patterns, my security protocols. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. They know how I think because I taught them. The admission hung in the air, raw and unguarded. It wasn't an apology. It was a fact. It was a weapon he was handing her. Lily stared at the map, at the sprawling grid of Miami. She thought back, forcing herself into the memories she had tried so hard to bury. She remembered their arrogance, the way they spoke of Sebastian not with fear, but with a bitter, resentful rivalry. They didn't just want her, they wanted to prove something to him. Then we stopped thinking like you, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. She tapped a finger on the map, on the chaotic maze of the port of Miami. We think like me. Like bait. His jaw tightened instantly. No. Listen to me, she insisted, her gaze locking with his. They're not just hunting me. They're taunting you. They want to prove you can't protect me. So we give them the perfect chance to try. She took a breath, the plan forming in her mind, sharp and clear. You're going to leak information. Not through your usual channels. You're going to let a rumor slip through the cracks, something that sounds like a mistake. A whisper that you're moving me. He watched her, his expression unreadable, but he didn't interrupt. He was listening. You're moving me to a safe house up the coast, she continued, her voice gaining confidence. The transfer will happen at night, during the storm that's coming in. Maximum chaos. Minimum visibility. You'll make it look like you're trying to be discreet, but you'll make sure there's a weak link. A guard who can be bribed, a route that's too predictable. A trap, he finished, his voice a low rumble of understanding. A trap, she confirmed. And I'm the cheese. They won't be able to resist the chance to grab me right from under your nose. It's not just about getting me back. It's about humiliating you. He was silent for a long time, his eyes boring into her. She could feel him weighing the risk, the cold calculation happening behind his stony expression. He was measuring her life against the probability of success. But then she saw something else in his gaze, a flicker of dark, dangerous pride. He wasn't looking at a victim anymore. He was looking at a strategist. The port, he said, his finger moving to the location she had pointed to earlier. The old container yard at Pier 7. It's a maze. Perfect for an ambush. We can control the entry and exit points. He looked up from the map, his eyes finding hers. They will walk in, but they won't walk out. The finality in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. This was real. The plan was set. The storm was a dark smudge on the horizon, forecast to hit in 2 days. 2 days until she walked willingly into the heart of her own nightmare. Fear, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat, but she pushed it down. She looked at Sebastian, at the man who had created her monsters and was now the only one who could help her destroy them. They will not win, she whispered, the words a promise to herself as much as to him. He reached across the desk, not to touch her, but to slide the pistol she'd been practicing with toward her. No, he said, his voice a dark vow. They won't. The wind hit her like a physical blow, screaming in from the sea. Rain came down in cold, driving sheets, turning the dockyard into a slick, black mirror that reflected the angry sky. Lily huddled behind a massive, rust-streaked shipping container, the corrugated metal cold against her back. The air was thick with the smell of salt, rain, and diesel fuel. It was a chaotic, violent symphony, and she was at its heart. The pistol tucked into the waistband of her jeans was a cold, hard promise. Her fingers were numb, but she could feel its weight, its reality. This was her choice. Her trap. Beside her, Sebastian was a statue carved from shadow and fury. The storm didn't seem to touch him. He stood with an unnerving stillness, his gaze fixed on the empty lane between the towering stacks of containers. They were in a man-made canyon, a maze designed for an ambush. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the roar of the storm. This was it. The culmination of 2 years of running, of a lifetime of fear. She looked at Sebastian, his profile a hard line in the gloom. He didn't look back. He was a predator in his hunting ground, and he was waiting for the prey to walk into his jaws. A pair of headlights sliced through the curtain of rain. A dark sedan slid to a stop 50 yards away, its engine a low growl that was quickly devoured by the wind. 2 doors opened. 2 figures emerged. Marcus Thorne, tall and sneering, and the bulldog, a squat shape of muscle and menace. They moved with an arrogant confidence, their shoulders hunched against the rain as they scanned the area. They thought they were the hunters. Sebastian stepped out from behind the container. He didn't draw a weapon. He just appeared, a dark figure of absolute authority in the middle of the storm. Thorne stopped, a slow, ugly smile spreading across his face. "Turner," he called out, his voice laced with triumph. "I knew you'd come yourself. Can't trust the help to move such precious cargo, can you?" "The girl is not your concern anymore, Marcus," Sebastian said, his voice a low rumble that carried effortlessly over the wind. "Oh, I think she is," Thorne shot back, taking a step forward. "See, you taught us to take what we want. And we want her. But we're willing to make a deal. A business proposition." Lily held her breath, her hand moving instinctively to the grip of her pistol. This was it. The moment of truth. Thorne's smile widened. He looked like a jackal that had cornered a lion. "I have a file. Names, dates, offshore accounts. Enough to unravel everything you've built. Enough to send your entire empire crashing down around you. All of your sins, Sebastian. All of your secrets." He let the words hang in the air, a poison that seeped into the storm itself. Sebastian didn't move, but Lily felt the shift in the air, the sudden, crushing weight of Thorne's words. Her own danger felt small, insignificant, compared to the threat now aimed at the heart of Sebastian's world. "Give us the girl," Thorne said, his voice slick and reasonable. "We walk away. The file disappears. Your world stays intact." He gestured dismissively in her general direction, though he couldn't see her. "She's not worth the price of everything you've built." "Is she?" The world seemed to hold its breath. The wind died for a split second, and in the sudden, ringing silence, Lily saw it. Sebastian didn't move. He didn't speak. But she saw the conflict in the rigid line of his shoulders, in the way a muscle in his jaw clenched tight. He was weighing it. He was weighing her life against his empire. In that terrifying, eternal second, the fragile trust she had placed in him fractured. He was considering the deal. The thought was a shard of ice in her heart. He saw her as a calculation, a price to be paid. Something inside her snapped. The fear, the cold, the years of running, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding steel. She would not be a bargaining chip. She would not be the price of his salvation. Ice flowed through her veins as she stepped out from behind the container. The rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't feel it. Her hand was steady as she drew the pistol from her waistband, the cold metal a familiar and solid weight. She raised it, the barrel unwavering as she pointed it not at Thorne, but at the empty space between them. Thorne's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. But Lily wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was locked on Sebastian. "The deal is off," she said, her voice cutting through the rising howl of the wind, clear and sharp as breaking glass. She took another step forward, moving into the weak light cast by the sedan's headlights. She was no longer a shadow to be hidden. She was the center of the storm. She turned her head, her eyes boring into Sebastian's, challenging him, daring him. "You don't get to choose," she said, her voice dropping, becoming a low and personal command meant only for him. "You don't get to weigh my life against your secrets. You protect me, or you are no better than them." He flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but she saw it. She had hit him where he lived, right in the heart of his twisted code. "Choose me over the Empire, Sebastian," she demanded, the words a raw, desperate vow. Right now. It was no longer about him saving her. It was about him proving he was worthy of the trust she had given him. It was about him choosing to be the man he claimed to be, not the monster who had created all of this. Sebastian's gaze broke from Thorn's. He looked at Lily. He saw not the terrified waitress from the diner, but the woman standing in the heart of a hurricane, holding a pistol and demanding her own worth. He saw the fire he had recognized from the very beginning, now burning bright and uncontrollable. He saw his own reflection in the defiant set of her jaw. A slow, dark smile touched his lips. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. He looked back at Thorn, the conflict in his eyes gone, replaced by a chilling, absolute certainty. "The Empire is worthless without its code," he said, his voice a low, final judgment. Then, his gaze slid back to Lily, a possessive, unbreakable promise in his eyes. "And she is my code now." The truce shattered. Thorn's face twisted into a mask of pure rage as he realized he had lost. "Kill them!" he screamed. The bulldog lunged, pulling a weapon from his jacket. But he was too slow. A single, deafening gunshot cracked through the storm, not from Lily's pistol or Sebastian's, but from the shadows around them. The world exploded in a flash of muzzle fire, and the screaming of the wind. The world erupted in a chaos of sound and motion. Before Lily could even process Sebastian's words, dark figures melted out of the shadows between the shipping containers. They were his men, silent and brutally efficient. Gunshots cracked, sharp and final, cutting through the howl of the wind. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. It was over almost as soon as it began. The rain continued to fall, washing the violence from the air, leaving only a ringing silence and the rhythmic crash of waves against the pier. Lily stood frozen, the pistol still heavy in her hand. Her arm was shaking now, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a cold, trembling hollowness in its place. The bodies of Marcus Thorne and his man were dark shapes on the wet ground. Gone. The ghosts that had haunted her for 2 years were finally, permanently gone. Sebastian walked toward her, his steps slow and measured. He stopped just in front of her, his dark eyes searching her face in the gloom. He didn't look at the carnage his men were now silently cleaning up. He only looked at her. He gently took the pistol from her numb fingers, his touch surprisingly warm against her cold skin. "It's over," he said, his voice a low rumble. The drive back to the mansion was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. Not angry or suffocating, but heavy with unspoken things. The storm was breaking, the relentless rain softening to a drizzle. As they pulled into the garage, the first pale, gray light of dawn was beginning to bleed across the horizon. He led her back inside, not to her room, but to the study. He left her standing by the window and went to his desk, picking up the phone. Lily watched him, her heart a slow, heavy beat in her chest. "It's done," he said into the receiver. His voice was cold, devoid of emotion. "Burn the file. Burn all of it. Cut them loose. The entire operation. I don't care about the cost." He listened for a moment, his jaw tight. "I said I don't care. It's a liability. My code has changed." He hung up. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She understood what she had just heard. He was severing ties, cutting out a piece of his own empire, the part that had festered and created the men who hunted her. He was making good on his choice, paying the price for her without a moment's hesitation. He was choosing his new code. He was choosing her. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The storm had passed. Sebastian walked out of the study, and she followed him, her bare feet silent on the cool marble floor. He didn't stop until they reached the grand foyer. He walked to the massive front doors and pulled them open, letting the clean, rain-washed morning air flood the cold, sterile entrance. He turned to her, a dark silhouette against the brilliant new day. "The threat is gone," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You are free, Lily. Truly free." He was giving her an out. No guards. No rules. The beautiful cage was open. She looked at him, at this dark, dangerous man who had saved her, imprisoned her, and ultimately sacrificed a part of himself for her. A part of her, a foolish, treacherous part, wanted to stay. It would be easy to remain in this fortress, to be his code, to be protected forever. But she had fought too hard for her own life to simply hand it over to someone else, even him. Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She walked toward him, stopping in the open doorway. She reached out and her fingers brushed his, a brief, final touch. "Thank you for my life, Sebastian." He nodded, his expression unreadable, but she saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. "No," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to go live it." She turned and walked out of the mansion, not looking back. She walked down the long, sweeping driveway, into the rising sun, leaving him standing alone in the shadows of his open door. She was finally, completely, on her own. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. A year had passed in the steady rhythm of flipping pancakes and wiping down clean counters. The neon sign outside didn't flicker. It glowed with a warm, steady light, casting the words, "Lily's Place," in a soft pink hue onto the Miami street. This diner was smaller than Winwood Eats, but it was bright, clean, and always smelled of coffee and sugar. It was hers. Lily moved through the space with an easy, practiced grace. Her movements were sure, her smile genuine as she refilled a customer's cup or cleared a table. The fear was gone. The constant, gnawing anxiety that had been her shadow for years had simply evaporated, leaving behind a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. She wore an apron, but it was no longer armor against a hostile world. It was a badge of honor, crisp and clean, a symbol of the life she had built with her own 2 hands. Late that night, after the last customer had left and her small staff had gone home, she was alone. The diner was quiet, filled with the low hum of the coolers and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. This was her favorite time of day. She wiped down the stainless steel counter, her reflection a blur in the polished surface. Her sleeves slid up, and the light caught the delicate glint of silver on her wrist. She still wore the bracelet. She had tried to take it off once, a week after she had walked away from his mansion. But her wrist had felt unnervingly bare without its cool weight. It was a reminder, not of the cage, but of the choice he had made in the storm. It was a scar she had chosen to keep. She rarely thought of him during the day, too busy with orders and inventory and the simple, beautiful chaos of running her own business. But in the quiet moments like this, he would surface in her memory, a dark, intense ghost. He had given her back her life. And then he had done the hardest thing. He had let her live it. Finishing her work, she untied her apron and hung it on its hook. She counted the day's earnings, her heart swelling with a quiet pride that never got old. She was safe. She was free. She was her own. Finally, she gathered her things, walked to the front, and flipped the sign in the window to closed. She locked the door, the click of the deadbolt a satisfying, final sound. Across the street, parked in the deep shadows beneath a banyan tree, a black sedan sat, sleek and silent as a shark. Its engine was off, its windows darkly tinted. No one on the street would have given it a second glance. It was just another expensive car in a city full of them. Inside, Sebastian Turner sat in the darkness, his hands resting on the steering wheel. He didn't move. He just watched. He watched her turn off the main lights, leaving only a single small lamp glowing over the counter. He watched her silhouette move through the diner one last time, checking everything was in its place. He saw the easy confidence in her posture, the peace in the way she moved. He had kept his promise. He had kept her safe so that one day, she could have this. She disappeared into the back for a moment, and then the last light went out, plunging the diner into darkness. He saw her exit through a side door, her steps sure and steady as she walked toward her own small car parked down the block. He waited until her taillights had vanished around the corner. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. He started the engine, its low, powerful rumble the only sound in the quiet street. He pulled away from the curb and drove off into the Miami night, a silent guardian leaving his post. His watch was over for the night. If you enjoyed the video, Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our content.